so many of my distinguished friends here and in India. And I am so delighted that you could make it in the morning in India. And my friends here, I see Sahana ji, Sushim ji, Prakash ji, Meg ji from India, Sumana ji, our fellow trustee and one of the pillars of A4H, Dr. Pankaj Shah, Achalesh ji, Prabhu ji, Surendra Singh Bisht ji, who is a foundation of our IHAR Bharat, and Sushim ji, Deepti ji, Ramesh Shah ji. We are delighted to have you along. I represent two organizations. One is Indian History Awareness and Research, that essentially brings in multidisciplinary scholars who look at Indian history through an Indic lens. So it's an emic perspective, and we think that we have the responsibility of restoring the Indic history narrative to Indians. And on the other hand, what does history do? It gives us a sense of identity. Who are we? And from the who are we, then we look at the world from our identity and our lens. What is our world? And then as a result of that, we engage with the world. And that engagement part is A4H, which is American for Hindus, that represents the interests of American Hindus, as well as it looks at the convergences of India and America, two great democracies, and that's the doing part. So we take the identity, engage with the world. We try to have, we have great faith in the classic Indian tradition of Purva Paksha and Uttar Paksha in our international engagements, though we are not there to win any debates, but I think we have the obligation of knowing as Indians the world very well and their view of us. And therefore, our responses have to be based not on emotions, but on yukti. And this is a very old tradition of ours, and there is no reason for us to abandon these frameworks. With that being said, I will also say that as Americans, they are very fond of talking about American exceptionalism and manifest destiny. And there is no reason for Indians not to be rooted in Indian exceptionalism that dates millennia and millennia prior to birth of America. And there is no reason for Indians to think that Indian destiny is the manifest destiny of the humanity. Because Indian ethos, Indian civilization, Indian knowledge systems have always been global in nature. And there is no reason why we cannot understand the model world and use our history to empower ourselves and engage with the world in a meaningful and productive way. And to that extent, I'm delighted to represent both organizations, representing, welcoming Dr. Chaulia, and I would request Mr. Pradeep Parekh ji, who engaged with the speaker, to introduce the speaker, following which Dr. Chaulia will take his time, about 45 minutes, following which we'll have a Q&A. Please submit your questions in writing to Sumana ji. There is Sumana ji on the screen, and Sahana ji, and we will have you ask the questions in an ordered way. And please keep your questions brief, and the comments come later. Thank you. No, Surendra ji, it looks like we don't have YouTube live streaming. Thank you again, and Pradeep ji.
Thank you, Subroto ji. Friends, I'm so very pleased that Professor Dr. Sreeram Chaulia is with us tonight from India, where it is still early morning. There is little doubt in the minds of the Indian people that India has arrived on the world stage and that India has a seat at the table of world powers. This process received a great acceleration in the last few years. We saw Prime Minister Modi ji address many parliaments of the leading nations. Many Middle East countries conferred their top honors on him. We saw him inaugurate the parliament of the war-torn Afghanistan. We saw him elevate relations with Japan. He visited numerous countries to build relations. What this means is that the Indian people are now well aware of the multipolar world that we live in, and that international relations for India is an important aspect of how India moves forward to its future growth. It therefore helps us a great deal to hear from an expert on international affairs. So we have a guest with us tonight, Professor Dr. Sreeram Chaulia, who excels at international relations and who I think is one of the best. Dr. Sreeramji has a PhD in political science and international relations from Syracuse University's Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs. Before that, he earned a master's degree from London School of Economics in History of International Relations. And preceding that, he earned a BA degree from both the University of Oxford and Stephens College of New Delhi. Currently, Dr. Sreeramji is a professor and the dean at the Jindal School of International Affairs of the O.P. Jindal Global University in Sonipat, India. He is a leading columnist for Indian newspapers, the Economic Times, and the Asian Age with respect to world affairs. He is routinely interviewed on TV and radio, both domestic and foreign. His TV interviews on Al Jazeera, Russia Today, Lok Sabha TV can be seen with the Google help. Professor Sreeramji's areas of specialization include diplomacy, foreign affairs, political economy, armed conflicts, and humanitarian practices. And he has authored several books, namely, he's a contributing editor for the book titled, it's a long title, International Organization and Civilian Protection, Power, Ideas, and Humanitarian Aid in Conflict Zones, which was published by IB Tauris in 2011. Another book, Politics of Global Economic Crisis, Regulation, Responsibility, and Radicalism. That book was published by Routledge in 2013. Another book, Modi Doctrine, The Foreign Policy of India's Prime Minister. That book was published by Bloomsbury in 2016. Another book titled Trumped, Emerging Powers in Post-American World. That was published by Bloomsbury in 2019. And his next book is coming up. It is titled The Crunch Time, Prime Minister Modi's National Security Crisis. Friends, welcome Dr. Sreeramji. Sreeramji, the floor is yours.
बहुत धन्यवाद आप सबका. थोड़ा सा मैं हिंदी में बोलूँगा पहले, then I will switch. आप सब प्रवासी भारतीय हमारी शान हैं. आप जितना कुछ कर रहे हैं उसकी कोई गिनती नहीं रख रहे हैं, लेकिन हमारे दिलों में आप सबके तरफ बहुत सारा आभार, बहुत सारा प्यार. आपने खास तौर पे ये जो संकट, स्वास्थ्य संकट हमारे पिछले 2 महीनों से चल रहा है, उसमें जो योगदान दिया है उसकी मैं कहूँगा कि कोई तुलना नहीं है. बल्कि पिछले कुछ दिनों में मैंने एक अखबार में एक लेख लिखा था, मिंट न्यूज़पेपर में, कि भारत के प्रति इतनी ज़्यादा संवेदना और सहयोग क्यों है फिलहाल. और इसकी वजह ये नहीं कि कोई दया या करुणा दिखा रहा है हम पर, बल्कि हम में कुछ काबिलियतें हैं, हमारी कुछ सफलताएं रही हैं, और साथ साथ हमारे जो प्रवासी हैं, जो डायस्पोरा है हमारी, वो हमारी शक्ति हैं. तो आप सब ने जो योगदान दिया है ये इतिहास याद रखेगा। बल्कि मैं कहूँगा कि 1990-91 के समय आप जानते हैं जब बैलेंस ऑफ पेमेंट क्राइसिस हुई थी, मैक्रो इकोनॉमिक कोलैप्स हुआ था हमारा, तो तब भी प्रवासियों ने साथ दिया था, रेमिटेंसेस इन सब ने हमारा किसी तरह गुजारा किया उस वक्त। एक और संकट की घड़ी थी 1998 99 में जब ये न्यूक्लियर टेस्ट हुए थे, उसके बाद जो सैंक्शंस हम पर लगे थे, प्रतिबंध अमेरिका से और कई अन्य देशों से, तब भी आप लोगों ने बड़ा साथ दिया है। तो देखिए कितना सफर हमने तय किया। एक जमाना था जब हमारे नेतृत्व कहती थी कि प्रवासी जो हैं वो हमें भूल चुके हैं और वो गद्दार हैं इस देश के, और आज हम कहते हैं कि आप हमारे सबसे मूल्यवान, हमारी जो नर्म शक्ति है, वैश्विक नर्म शक्ति है, सॉफ्ट पावर, उसका सबसे बड़ा जो हथियार हमारा है वो आप हैं। तो आप सबके लिए खास नमन, और मदर इंडिया विल नॉट फॉरगेट व्हाट यू आर डूइंग, सो थैंक यू ऑल. I am also very honored to be here with all of you, to be addressing many senior representatives of the diaspora and the global Indian community. The way you have done extraordinarily well in your own professional careers remains an inspiration for all of us in India and across the world. You are the most powerful diaspora in the world, barring the Jewish diaspora, and it just shows कि क्या मतलब the individual brilliance as well as the ability to organize and to come into groups and communities. And I think the US based diaspora, for obvious reasons, is the strongest, not just in numbers. If I'm not wrong, we're more than 4 million Indian Americans now. But it's also, I think, the atmosphere there. Pradeep ji was mentioning the fact that we are two democracies. I think it's natural for associations to form in a country like the US, which has always encouraged this. You go back in time to 19th century, Tocqueville and the famous works about America, civic associationism is one of the key strengths. So I'm very delighted to just observe the evolution of our diaspora and how far they have come. So it's really an honor for me to be with you all today, and you are part of the story of why I will make the case we should remain optimistic about India. This is not a great time, as you know. The second wave of the virus has been quite devastating, and we have been suffering tremendous losses. I hope your near and dear ones are okay, and if you have lost people, all of us have lost somebody or the other in the last few weeks. My deepest condolences, and I hope we can reflect on this tragic moment, but also think about how to move ahead. In fact, when Pradeep ji was discussing the potential topic, I wanted to challenge the momentary despair and momentary sense of collapse that we are hearing about India, and to take a longer term view about how we can still lead and how we can still provide solutions to global problems on the basis of our ethos of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam and Sarve Jano Sukhino Bhavantu. So Sarve Santu Niramaya, both these. So my point is that essential point is that we must not succumb to excessive pessimism, which you sometimes hear about India, especially since Narendra Modi came to power. There has been a concerted effort to damage India's image and to attack India on various counts. You just go back in time, not just the pandemic. Every step, whenever he took bold decisions or tried to transform this country, there were detractors. And of course, in a democracy, both within the country and global public opinion, people are free to air comments. But the kind of excessive self-deprecation that we saw among some people within our own country and in some elements of misguided elements, I would say, of the diaspora, that was not called for. And also the sense of excessive self-cynicism कि अच्छा भाई हमारा कुछ हो नहीं सकता, हम ऐसे ही रहेंगे, and we continue to wallow in failure. That kind of mood you keep hearing episodically. We heard that during the demonetization and the GST reforms. We heard that during the Article 370 when it was scrapped in Kashmir. We heard that during the farmers' agitation. We heard that during the anti-CAA agitation, and so on. And now we are hearing it during the second wave. At every step, it's being portrayed that India is going backwards, or that India has lost its way. India has lost its soul, some people claim. So, and the depth of this criticism, it does not mean that the ground realities are so bad, but it's there, right? And to some extent, we in democratic societies, we accept criticism, and everyone is free to air their views, no problem. But I would suggest, and that's why I took up this topic, that we need to move out of this negativity, and despite the losses and the human calamity that we are undergoing right now, we need to put these in perspective. So, post-COVID world order. Let me first talk about what has happened in the last 1.5 years. Now, what happens with these cynics and critics is that they tend to look at India singularly, even though we are in a global crisis. There is a lack of perspective or comparative analysis in most of these momentary judgments. So if you have, some left liberal opinion makers saying that India has collapsed, that's what they are calling us in the last 6 weeks, 5 to 6 weeks, 7 weeks, with the death toll rising and the cases mounting. They are saying India has collapsed. There is no governance. There is no leadership. This is all our dreams of leading the world have we have been, given a reality check, etc. Right? Now, the problem with this is the lack of comparative perspective. This has been a global crisis. You all know it. You are in the US, or last almost until March, until just about 7-8 weeks ago, the US was in an extended crisis and has suffered immensely. European countries suffered immensely. Latin America suffered immensely. Other parts of Asia suffered immensely. So there are very few what you can call like perfect response cases, countries which have managed this crisis extraordinarily well. Right? So in fact, there are hardly any. Even the ones that in the first round, the first wave of last year were said to be outstanding in their response. Later on, they went under the hammer of the pandemic in second and third and fourth waves. I mean, think of a country like Germany. It was initially praised for its being an exception within Europe, while the others were getting devastated that Germany somehow survived. But then you take a longer view and look at these phase by phase. Every country has gone through a lot. And barring China, which of course is a totally different case, and I'll come to that because it's a very central question about the post-COVID world order. But even China, given its lack of transparency and openness, we really don't know the level of devastation they suffered because there was a lot of cover-up. The whole pandemic started because of the Chinese Communist Party's shenanigans. So let's put this in perspective. India is struggling. There's no doubt about it. Our health system has been overwhelmed. There's no doubt about it in the last 6-7 weeks. Yes. And India has deficiencies. Of course, we are open to admit it. We are a developing country. There's a lot that's missing with our health infrastructure and with our response. Okay. But so have many other countries, right? So if people say Narendra Modi failed, he should resign. I say 50 other prime ministers and presidents around the world have failed and should all resign. So let's this is where I hope that we have a historical sense and also a comparative viewpoint. This is not a problem that's unique to India. And by the way, if we were talking in February, there would be no such judgments. At the time, India was deemed as a success. In March, India was deemed as a success. It's only from April where the ones who are sharpening the knives and waiting for this to happen, for some lightning to strike, they feel vindicated right now. But I'm proposing that if you take a longer term view, in another 6 weeks, 8 weeks, you are not going to be facing this situation in India. It is going to subside. And then, of course, the pace of vaccination, the speed at which we bounce back economically, all those will matter. And on those fronts, I think we can be more optimistic. Even with the vaccines, you've been hearing a lot of negative stuff. Ki, acha bhai, there is a supply shortage now. We have run out of things. We bungled. We made huge mistakes in vaccine rollout. Well, almost 200 million people have been vaccinated at least once. That's second only to the US and China, which of course is a completely different system and cannot be compared. A closed a totalitarian system. Among the democracies, given our size, of course, we are falling short. But you again do a comparative analysis on a per capita basis or just in the absolute numbers, our vaccination drive has not been a failure. It has slowed down. We are now facing bottlenecks. I thank everybody in the diaspora for fighting for raw materials to be supplied, to be resumed. It was a big victory that Biden administration finally agreed. But even now, as you know, there are still gaps in the resumption of raw material supplies, which is slowing down our domestic production. But big picture is close to 200 million have been vaccinated. By August, we should get to 300, 400 million. By December, the government says 2 billion doses will be around and we will be administering these. So yes, there have been, we were taken by surprise by the second wave, by the ferocity of the second wave. Even the ones who were predicting the second wave did not tell us how many mutants and how deadly it is going to be. So the death rate has been higher this time, much higher than the first wave. And if you want to blame somebody, then there is a collective blame to go around among many, many stakeholders. But that's okay. What I'm saying is every life matters, and we bow our heads and in respect. And definitely there's a sense of guilt also that maybe we could have done more and better. But what does that mean? Does it mean we have collapsed? Does it mean we have become completely incapable? Does it mean that there is state failure in India? I would say no. And if we were having another discussion, hopefully we will have many more, let's say in 3 months from now, I think the mood is going to be different. Why? One, because the fundamentals are still there and they're still going for India. Firstly, the bounce back, the rebound, despite the second wave and the shutdowns and the closures that we have witnessed in the last 6-7 weeks, the bounce back is still predicted by all international as well as domestic analysts to be fairly strong. We will have double-digit growth in 2021, this fiscal year. And some of the projections are being pared down because of what has happened in the last 1.5 months, 2 months. But then the confidence index and so on, if you look at those, the nitty-gritty, the granular data, it does suggest that it is going to be a robust recovery. In fact, I was talking to Vivek Debroy, one of the economic advisors to the Prime Minister's council the other day, and he was saying, 2021 is going to be strong no matter how bad the second wave will be. And 2022, the real question is, can we sustain it for 2022? And that's where the big question, reforms and other things will be needed. I'm sure that government and private players are cognizant of this and will work towards this. So bounce back is going to be strong. In fact, this year, you will see that by end of this year, we would have notched higher growth rate than any other major economy, even better than China's. Of course, one can argue that the base was so low in 2020 because of the collapse and because of the national lockdown and the collapse, minus 22% GDP in one of the quarters, all those. So the base level is low. So it will look like 2021 is high, But then how do we sustain it 22 and 23? That's the real big question. So one is the vaccine rollout. Like I said, I think the pressures, the supply bottlenecks will ease. Our diplomacy as well as domestic policy makers are working very hard. Our healthcare professionals are working very hard. So I think that you will see a different picture by June or July. There'll be more and more people vaccinated. And definitely before the end of the year, there's the talk about a third wave coming again. I think we will be able to avert it, touch wood. And even if it comes, it will not be as devastating as this one, because by the time we expect at least 40% or more of the population. And as you know, when we talk of 40% of India, it means probably like the whole of Europe or more, right? The numbers. So I think the demographic comparative and historical or relative historical perspective is necessary. What we are seeing is, driven by the social media, the frenzy to make contrary viewpoints. People are pouncing on a moment of weakness, a moment, not fundamental, but a moment of weakness, and are trying to to downgrade our image and to project a sense that of state failure or collapse, right? So I know you are not some of those, but in a way I'm preaching to the choir. But I think though it's necessary that people know the fundamental strengths of this country and that we should promote it. And what else apart from economic and the healthcare response? I think the cultural unity of this country has often been underestimated. You in the diaspora don't need an introduction to this, but you look at the wider commentariat, especially in the Western mainstream, the liberal media. They have as I said, a grudge against Narendra Modi. They have had a long grudge against him because they think he's taking this country in the wrong direction and not as per their ideological prescriptions. And they have been looking for moments like these of weakness to pounce on him and to say that he's the wrong person to lead the country and that he's taking the country down to ruin. This is the kind of a narrative we are hearing more and more. What they don't see, and which I see, I've come back from the US 2008. For 14 years, almost 13 years, I've been living here. And I've fairly traveled in the country and I'm in touch with grassroots communities here. What I see is there is no such so-called social polarization or extreme division in the society. India is not divided. This is a very important point people don't realize, because every time you open the New York Times or the Washington Post or CNN, the first thing they're telling us, or the BBC, the first thing they're telling us is Narendra Modi is a divisive leader. First, divisive. Second, Hindu nationalist, fundamentalist. Third, intolerant. This is the basis on which they have constructed narrative, right? Even before the corona, setbacks, I am saying we have, there are many things in which we could have done better, and there's much to learn and improve. I am admitting, yes, but their narrative has been, even before this, they had started with this idea that India was somehow a very, very tolerant place, but now it has become a place where fanatics are ruling and are dominating the scene. Now, this, belies the reality of the cultural unity of this country. You see it in the pandemic response. You see it in everyday life. There is no such hatred among communities. I do not see that. So if one MP of, a party which has 303 MPs makes some outrageous comment, that suddenly gets tossed around in social media, picked up by Fareed Zakaria or somebody, and then they have this narrative that things are going downhill, things are so bad in India. These crazy fanatics and fundamentalists have taken over. This is how they've spun the narrative, and a lot of people are buying this internationally, right? So even though we've been trying to counter this, and I'll come to how we should counter this in a moment, the point is, at the grassroots, people are not worried about intolerance. You know it, and I know it. You are still in contact with your communities across in your native places back home in India. There is no such. This is not an issue. So-called intolerance or hatred or enmity between religious communities which is being stoked. This is not actually a major issue. In fact, you go down, and by the way, the data also speaks. 2019 general election, 10% of Muslims of India voted for Bharatiya Janata Party. 10%. It's a lot. It may sound like less, but in a multi-party system where there are so many regions and so many different political parties, each vying for votes in different states across the union, 10% is not small. 10% of Indian Muslims is more than 20 million votes, approximately. So, and a lot of them, when you talk to them, ordinary people, not the politicized or ideologically motivated so-called leaders of these communities, a lot of them say they have no issue with this. In fact, they are in a way tuned out of this whole debate about secularism, communalism, majoritarianism, appeasement, all these things. Frankly, the whole culture war that you hear about is being fought on Twitter and on Facebook and on TV channels. But once you step out of that, you don't see it in the grassroots realities. People are still looking for very basic things: good governance, healthcare. Unfortunately, right now we are struggling. Education. People do care about those things, and people have a sense that we all civilizationally are one people, are one nation. No, that is there. There's a fundamental unity of India, which is our strength, which people don't see it. In fact, they have been trying to spread the view that India is now there are too many fissures in the society and it's getting polarized. Frankly, polarization happens. In fact, you in the US know it better. The ideological polarization there is much stronger. It's almost 50-50 of the population. We don't have such a stark division between two camps, who think of the other side as the enemy. I don't think we have ever reached, and I don't think we're going to reach that state, because culturally there is this binding factor. And so that also is our core strength. So how are we going to lead the post-COVID world order, given these strengths? Firstly, we are going to bounce back. And I'll eat my words or stop being an analyst if this doesn't happen before the end of this year. We are going to bounce back on all these fronts, on the health front, on the economic front, and very importantly, in our diplomacy. It's very unfortunate that some people in India and around the world have been mocking us in the last few weeks, saying that we supplied vaccines to 95 countries, but we don't have vaccines for our own people. You hear this. Now, what they are not obviously aware of is that because we supplied vaccines to 95 countries, those countries are giving back to us when we suddenly needed temporary medical assistance. It's a quid pro quo, and reciprocity matters in international affairs. And they are grateful to India. We did a lot for them. Why should we say that it was a mistake? If we had not done what we did from January to March in 95 countries, why would the world be standing with us today in our hour of need? No. So this is all myopic talk. In fact, I remember when a prime minister used to travel frequently, and I hope the time comes back when we resume normalcy, when he used to do international diplomacy and personal chemistry with world leaders and travel around. My book, Modi Doctrine, talks a lot about it. There were naysayers in India saying, oh, why does he travel so much? How much does it cost us? Cost the taxpayer, all the prime ministerial visits. They were obviously totally ignorant about the benefits. They're only looking at the costs. So this is the narrow-minded commentary that we hear, but we must challenge it. There are benefits to everything we have done. Vaccine diplomacy was a success until it slowed down. We are now recalibrating. But be it the World Health Organization, the COVAX facility, or many other countries around the world, they were hoping that we will continue this in April and May, and we could not because of the sudden surge of crisis of the cases at home. But we will resume it. In fact, as the supply chain bottlenecks get reduced, and the US has to play a very important role for us in that, and as the intellectual property rights waiver comes through, and we need some quicker action at the WTO on this, you will find that our support and generosity to the rest of the world will resume. Yeah. So I take strong exception to those who are saying that we have become beggars now and we are just going out hat in hand and seeking other people's help, and that we have not been Atmanirbhar. The point is, these are momentary judgments. Nobody was criticizing our vaccine diplomacy until March. Now, like vultures, when we have a bad time or a bad spell of hopefully no more than 2 months, they are saying that in hindsight it was a mistake. We are now hearing so-called pundits, a lot of people giving hindsight wisdom and saying you should not have done this, you should have done this, this was better. It's easy to say this, but I would say let's respond to the pandemic now than to make these kind of momentary judgments. It doesn't help anybody. Who should apologize, who to blame? People will decide. Let people of India decide, not these pundits. I think so. That's where. So what else? Vaccine diplomacy will resume. Second, Dr. Jaishankar, our foreign minister, has been talking about trust and transparency. These have now become very fundamental issues in shaping the post-COVID world order. Trust and transparency. People lost trust in China completely. If at all there was any left, they lost it the moment they unleashed this virus in late November. I wrote about this even before it became a global pandemic in January 2020, at the time when they were still hiding the truth and only trickles of information was coming out about what happened in Wuhan. And I said that this is a big political failure of communist China. And since then, it's quite obvious that the way they covered up for a number of months, most likely the virus had been circulating as early as September of 2019, if not earlier. We came to know about it only in January 2020. 5 million people left Wuhan and spread across China and across the world. And the party knew about it and they were holding back. Because of the usual thing with authoritarian systems, they're not transparent, they're not trustworthy, they hide the truth. Because the bad news means the system is in jeopardy. So they always cover up. You know the history of the Soviet Union, history of communist China, they always do this. So this was a repeat show of the very fundamental nature of these regimes, right? So post-COVID, now the Chinese are saying that we have won the race to be the leader of the world, and because they have managed to clamp down the virus domestically, they say that their model is now superior to the American one or to any other one. And India, they think that it's a failure. That's the Chinese have this condescending view of India. And in fact, last year I'm writing this new book, Crunch Time, on the Prime Minister's management of national security crisis. And you look at the last year, the aggression at the LAC by China, it was on the premise that India was struggling with Corona and could not match them, and that they could bounce back quicker. But I think the verdict is still out. As far as trust goes, the world's trust in China is at the lowest point. China believes that materially it is bouncing back, it's got economic growth going, and it will reduce the gap with the US and overtake the US very quickly as a result of the pandemic induced slowdowns. But as far as the image and the trust factor go, I think it's the lowest point. In fact, the opinion polls and the surveys worldwide show that mistrust or even hatred of China is at the highest point around the world, right? So trust, we are going to emphasize more of this factor going forward. Can you trust India to be the pharmacy of the world or China? It's a no-brainer. In fact, China is boasting right now that it has given 200 million vaccines worldwide. What is the efficacy of those vaccines? Some of you are distinguished medical practitioners. You please tell me, the clinical trials show no more than 50% efficacy of Sinopharm and Sinovac. Many countries have taken these vaccines and are now regretting it. In fact, there are countries like Brazil, Chile, Seychelles, to name a few, which have openly come out and said, we relied on Chinese vaccines, but the efficacy is so low that the infection rate has gone up after administering 2 doses of the Chinese vaccines. You have a situation where like this. So what does it mean that they are going to lead now? There is a Singaporean diplomat, Kishore Mahbubani, who wrote a book last year called Has China Won? And he says China has already got all the advantages and is winning. But I don't see that. In fact, their ability to win the trust and the confidence of the world is at the lowest point. And they have to blame themselves for it. It's not because any Western conspiracy or to run them down or to defame them. So I think their actions, their misdemeanor, and their misadventures, be it territorial aggression, be it their opaqueness on the virus, all these are showing. And it's not easy for the world to forget and move on and to say, okay, China is a big power and we have to respect them. They have lost respect. And that matters actually. People think that only military and economic might is all that counts. I don't think so. To rebuild, to create a world order, you need more. When the United States was at its peak after World War II, when they made the world order, and the post 1945 dispensation, and especially after 1991, it was at its peak. It was not due to just material superiority of military and economic might. It was because they had ideas and they had a certain cooperative approach to the world that won a lot of support and willing takers. It was not an empire that was imposed as some American historians have said. It was, if at all it was an empire, it was an empire by invitation or inspiration, not by imposition or by force or coercion. So I think the Chinese are trying their luck at empire by coercion, and it's not going to work. So the other thing that we are talking about for post-COVID world order is over-dependence. Dr. Jaishankar, Prime Minister Modi, all of us have been emphasizing here that there's been a phenomenon of over-dependence on China for everything, right? A kind of a globalization which was China-centric or Sino-centric. President Donald Trump had raised this in a big way and had challenged this. And this issue of over-dependence on China will come to haunt us. And I think the realization is now upon everyone. So Chinese exports are bouncing back, they're saying, and the Zoom boom, so to say, because of the work from home and all these which have become global norms in the last 1.5 years due to the pandemic. Chinese manufactured goods have suddenly found a market. But I don't think, and if you see the fundamentals, that's not a long-lasting phenomenon. So I see that there is going to be a concerted push by many, many, many countries around the world to reduce their dependence on China. And that's where, alternative providers will come into play. And here, I think, be it in India, can be a big provider of vaccines. As I've already mentioned, there is a plan to have 1 billion or more vaccines manufactured through the Quad mechanism, India, Japan, Australia, US combination. And many countries are trying to support us, are going to invest in the medium to long terms to make us capable providers of public health goods, not only for our own population, but for the region. So that realization is there. And here the importance of coalitions comes. China does not have a coalition. If you see, it likes to deal unilaterally or bilaterally with most players. It does not have a big set of allies, so to say. North Korea and Pakistan are the nearest you can say are allies, and they really don't count much globally. On the other hand, there is one strength that the US used to have, has worn out for some time, but could revive, and which is the alliance systems. So those things will matter. Coalitions, democracy will matter in the post-COVID world order. How did the virus escape, be it a lab or a wet market, and cause so much devastation worldwide? Is because of the lack of democracy and openness in that country, in China. So democracy has been on the back foot. People claim that it's receding, but I will say that it's something that very much matters and is going to matter more going forward. So like-minded countries are coming together. There are a lot of joint initiatives, not just for vaccines. There is a supply chain resilience initiative to break away from dependence on China. And by the way, people say, "Acha bhai, kya hua aapka Atmanirbhar Bharat ka? Now you don't have vaccines for yourself." The point is, take a longer term view. Last year, when the first wave hit, we were also panicking, but not as much as second wave because the mutation was different. But it was there. There was a crisis. Last March, April, we didn't have PPE kits, not enough protective equipment for our nurses and doctors. I still remember many doctors saying, "How can we even touch corona patients? We don't have enough PPE kits," and they're asking us to treat them. But we did a turnaround in 3 to 4 months. 3 to 4 months, that's all. We ramped up domestic manufacturing. Now we don't need imported PPE kits, which was at that time like gold dust. It was most wanted commodity. Now we are self-sufficient in it. Now oxygen, there has been a shortage. Ventilators, suddenly there is a shortage that's come up. We are working on these. Nobody is perfect, right? And in this post-COVID world order, what you're going to see is multiple centers of power. There's not going to be one big power center that is so perfect or so capable of solving not just its own problems, but of the whole world. So in this, what we call multipolar order, where the multiple power centers, coalitions are the key. So I think the coalitions is what is going to make India a big player in this region, in Indo-Pacific. Nobody wants us to fail except one country and its proxy. No prizes for guessing which two I mean. Except those two, nobody wants us to fail. So the world is going to cheer for us and root for us. Why? Because of these innate strengths. They are not going to be judging us by what the liberal or leftist commentators are telling us what is wrong with India. I'll give you one example, and then I'll open up for a discussion. Last June, 2020 June, we got re-elected with a non-permanent seat to the UN Security Council. Some of you may have read about it. Ideally, we need a permanent seat. We deserve it. We're 1/6 of humanity, but that's a different question, and we've been doing so much good for the world. But at least we got a non-permanent seat, right? UN reforms is a bigger issue. 184 out of 191 countries voted for India. Let me repeat, 184 out of 191 countries. That is our strength. That is the positive image and the relationships we have built, the goodwill that we have with the rest of the world, the outreach that has happened in the last 7 years and is going to continue. 184 out of 191. That's something to be proud about. It was a record. In fact, the last time we got elected to the Security Council in 2011, we had much fewer votes than that. So those who are saying that India is going downhill or collapsing are building a narrative that is contrary to both to the grassroots realities of what is happening within India and to the global diplomatic and soft power realities, right? So to say that we have lost our way or that we cannot lead is simply people who want us to fail. It's not an objective assessment that we have failed. There are people who want us to fail and who are latching on to this moment of weakness to drive home their point. But I can tell you, in 2 to 3 months, such doomsayers and naysayers will not have an audience. All of us have lost people. It's a very emotional time. I know it's a difficult time for many of you in the diaspora also, because you're so far away. All of us have undergone pain and suffering, but it doesn't mean that we give up on our motherland. It doesn't mean that we join this cynicism show, and it doesn't mean that we opportunistically jump. Until March we were okay, and now we are saying we are collapsed. What is the meaning of that? And again by July, when things improve and return to normalcy, and India is again bouncing back, those people will not be heard. So the momentary judgments, momentary and impressionistic commentary and analysis has to be rejected. All of you are intellectuals, and I urge you all to have faith in Mother India, in our innate abilities, our cultural strength, and all the other indicators I mentioned, our diplomacy, our economy, and not to give up, because if all of us also withdraw and develop doubts in a moment of crisis, then the crisis will be prolonged. Crisis can be overcome only through self-confidence. So we have done it before. By the way, our handling of the first wave was widely seen as a success. If the same leadership was there last year, same country, same people, how is it that they said that first wave was done very well, but second wave has been screwed up? It cannot be, right? There is the main reason why we are struggling is with the second wave is because of the mutation, as I see it. It's just a deadlier strain that has hit us this time. So I think our capacities obviously are lacking in many areas. I won't deny it. We are still a developing country with a low per capita income, a low tax base. We still need a lot. We are a long way to go. But we are holding our own. And we are going to try and shape the norms of this post-COVID world order through our own actions, through protecting our people, through being a provider of public goods to other needy countries. We are going to shape the norms. I think that is where as I said, the narrative is what matters. Norms and narrative, much more than just the economic or military fundamentals. So that's where the Chinese are not able to shape the global norms. If they say that our system is superior, what are they saying? That they're going to export. In fact, Xi Jinping's one of a trademark policies is to export the Chinese model and to coax or to coerce developing countries to adopt the Chinese model of governance and to say that this is superior to the Western democracy. But what that system has done, I don't have to tell you. And people have now woken up to what the Chinese system is doing to the world. So I don't think that vision of a post-COVID world order with China as the leader is going to succeed. Nor can we say that the America of the old will return, because power has become distributed. So coalitions, the US has to play a big role, has to play a lead role, but there are many others that will matter in this emerging world order. And I would humbly submit that our best is yet to come. We have gone through a tough phase, but our best is yet to come. Thank you.
Thank you,
Namaste,
Dr. Chaulia.
everyone. Please go ahead.
Sumanaji, you go ahead and please start the Q&A.
Namaste, everyone. Namaste, Sreeramji. We have a couple of questions here. I will let them ask. Before they ask, one remark here. I think you briefly touched on it, but what was the strategy of India sending the vaccines outside first before vaccinating the population?
Thank you. Shall I respond to this or take a few?
One by one, we will go. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, what was the strategy? Well, we had the capacity. The projections were that we will have Serum Institute, Bharat Biotech, all our big companies were projecting 100 million, 70, 80 million per month of production. And we had a fairly good stockpile, and we had no sense of any kind of a second wave hitting us in January. So, warnings, people say the warnings were given by this scientist or this healthcare professional or the other. Warnings are always given, right? Like policymakers cannot really take, if you go by warnings, there are many which do not even materialize, right? So which one to take, which not to take, I don't know. I mean, it's a call. And by the way, it's also a misnomer to say that we should have kept those vaccines back. The volume of vaccines we have sent out is not so massive. It's only around 66 million. That's all we did. But it was given to a large number of needy countries. And by the way, it was not insignificant. I mean, you look at a country like Bhutan or Nepal, or Maldives or Sri Lanka, or countries in Africa, which are small, For them, even getting 2-3 million or 4 million was going to be sufficient, was quite sizable. So it's not, 65 million is all that we have exported, right? So those who are saying, why did we give it away? What is the scale of our requirement? It's not 65 or 66, 600 or more, 700 million is what we need. So had we held on to it at home, let's say we would have our own version of India first. No helping anybody, India first. Would having 65 million have solved our problem right now? Look at the scale at which we need, right? So at most, now what is the daily average of the last 2 months is about 2 million doses a day. We could have had 30 days equivalent of supply still with us. Uske baad kya karte? The bottlenecks are still there. So I think it's logically inaccurate to say that just because we sent out some vaccines, we are now facing a shortage. The shortage is not because of vaccine diplomacy. Shortage due to raw material expectations were not fulfilled by US companies. That was a big problem. Shortage is because IPRs, since last October, we have been waging this struggle for IPRs to be lifted. The shortage is because simply the scale of demand for a large country is very high. So I think when we did this from January to March, it was on the assumption that there would be no such massive wave. You could argue that it was in hindsight, we are wiser. At that time, nobody was criticizing vaccine diplomacy. We were all, even the cynics were saying India is doing a great job. It is a pharmacy of the world. It is earning us a lot of goodwill. It did earn goodwill. And as I'm saying, it is paying off now. So it was seen as a kind of a soft power diplomatic strategy to show that we care for the rest of the world and to gain influence. And we have gained influence, I can tell you that. So the benefits are there. And the costs of doing that vaccine diplomacy are rather low. In fact, I would not say that it was a blunder at all, because keeping those would not have solved the massive needs we have at home. So yeah, that's my view.
Thank you, Sreeramji. Next question, Adityanji will ask a question. Adityanji, please go ahead.
Dr. Chaulia, it was a wonderful presentation. I represent two organizations. One of them is International Commission for Human Rights and Religious Freedom, and second is Council for Strategic Affairs. This criticism of India is not new. Since 1947, I would say the nattering nabobs of negativism have predicted India's breakdown. It hasn't happened. And it will not happen despite the COVID crisis. But if you look at the geopolitical events, after every major upheaval in the world, there is restructuring of global power. So after the First World War, you had League of Nations, which of course disappeared. After Second World War, you had United Nations. We don't have a Third World War, and it's not like to happen in the conventional sense. The COVID crisis is a global crisis akin to a world war. And once this is over, there is likely to be geopolitical realignment. What should India do or strategize to do to have the seat on the high table, i.e. United Nations Security Council or some similar analog, which might be sort of evolved in future? Should our strategy to go alone or to go along with G4, which has not worked for the last 20 years?
Thank you, Adityanji. I think, yeah, it's an inflection point. No doubt, this crisis is akin to a world war, at least in terms of the shaking the fundamentals of the pre-existing order. The pre-existing order was of globalization, which was Sinocentric of the last 20 years or so. And now that's no longer viable. A Sinocentric globalization is not viable. And that's why I said that we are going to look at reliable supply chains worldwide. So realignments, look, I think one thing even before this crisis, or as this crisis was going on last year, as I said, I've done a lot of research on why the Chinese pressed us so hard on the borders last year militarily. And it's quite obvious that they thought that we had become preoccupied with COVID, with the first wave, and was struggling and could not stop them. In fact, they used this same strategy against many other countries in Asia with whom they had disputes. So they thought they had the upper hand and that they could press home their advantage at a moment when we were all preoccupied with health crisis. But the way our national security apparatus responded, our military, our defense apparatus, I mean, that's just been an unsung saga. And my book, Crunch Time, which is coming out in a few months, will highlight a lot of that, of how we responded to Chinese aggression. But so the realignment in this situation where there is a China that feels emboldened and overconfident that it is now winning. Xi Jinping says the East is rising and the West is declining. And in East, he does not include India. He basically means China and Greater China region. So in this, the alignment is quite obvious. I mean, we used to hesitate in earlier periods about being too closely associated with the US in the name of strategic autonomy and all that. Those things the blinkers have all fallen aside. The ones on the left, even some of our career diplomats, the bureaucracy used to be hesitant to be playing realpolitik. We have to be a moral power and we should not take sides. There was a talk of a non-alignment 2.0 and all that. All those have fallen aside. After the Galwan clash last year, the blinkers just fell aside. So we are now more clear-eyed about who is our main adversary and how do we do to contain and push back the aggression of this main adversary. So that's, I think, for us, post-COVID world order, the big realignment is not only with the US, it's also we are being very proactive with Australia, with Japan, with Indonesia, with Vietnam. There is a coalition building happening. Some people, you hear about Quad plus. There is now also the D10. Some of you may have heard of this idea, G7 plus 3, Australia, India, and South Korea, on 5G technology, for example, on infrastructure, for example, and of course, militarily. There are many things we are going to be doing together with like-minded partners. India, we are hesitant to call it alliance. But increasingly, the reality is pushing us in that direction. Chinese conduct, Chinese behavior is pushing us in that direction. So there are going to be alliance patterns forming, and it is in the mutual interest of the US and of India to make this alliance work. So I think there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes for Indo-Pacific and how to secure the Indo-Pacific, how to prevent it from becoming a Chinese lake. I think that's the number one geopolitical question. And eventually, that should open the door for us to be acknowledged as global leaders, because you uphold world order through action and through norms, right? Or create new world order through action and through norms. And the action and the normative messaging has to be in tandem with each other. So I think that's the best effort we are making right now. I would say militarily, we have underinvested. I'm a big supporter of our Prime Minister, but one thing where we have been deficient is with the military spending, defense spending. It is less than 1.5% of GDP in the last few years. So we need to really ramp up to be able to build these coalitions and to also militarily push back China in the Indo-Pacific. So I think the theater of competition is increasingly Indo-Pacific. And this is where these new post-COVID world order will be decided, and in a geopolitical sense. And we have to do a lot, even with the Europeans. Now we have started this new connectivity projects. I'm trying to recall what it's called. It's a long-term connectivity plan. So the more we are able to do alternatives to the Belt and Road Initiative of China, the more we are likely to sustain a new world order. If not, then the pattern of last 20 years will repeat, and it will look like the COVID crisis of 2 years or so simply exacerbated the existing structural realities and did not lead to a new world order. So the big question is, are we able to move the needle in a different direction with these kinds of actions and norms. So strategically, I think our leadership is quite aware of it. And I believe that once we get out of this bad phase, in the next month or two, you will see us again being engaged heavily with the rest of the world to make it happen. Formal institutions, UN Security Council reform and all those, unfortunately, they are bogged down by bureaucratic procedures, and there is just no momentum on reform, structural reform. And frankly, the veto power and the rule of unanimity rather than majority voting in the Security Council, to be able to reform and to bring in new members, it requires unanimous consent of all 5 permanent members rather than just majority voting. We have a majority long ago, both in General Assembly and in Security Council. Barring China, nobody opposes our entry. But due to these procedures, so we have to, in a way, we have to just let it be. I mean, we have made our efforts. We continue to advocate for reform. But those things, but G20, G7 plus 3, or what we call it D10, Club of Democracies, Summit of, all these groupings, we have got to be much more prominent. Alternative institutions. So, I mean, waiting for Godot, it's like, it's a forever thing with the UN Security Council. You are seeing it. I mean, just last week, you saw how the UN Security Council was totally ineffective in stopping the war in Gaza and in Israel, right? I mean, it's paralyzed, its ineffectiveness is quite obvious. So we will continue to try to push for text-based negotiations for Security Council reform. But, there are limits to, I don't see it on the horizon happening anytime soon. Meanwhile, let's focus on other initiatives, what we call plurilateral or small group initiatives, coalitions. That's how we can change the world order. And for all we know, there could be a new global institution or emerging, in due time that will replace the UN or will completely revamp its procedures, because the rules and the procedures of the UN are the basic problem now. They're being exploited by China to stymie any reforms, or fundamental change. So China has exploited global institutions, has exploited American corporate need for cost cutting and profits through outsourcing. China has exploited this whole globalization process. And that's what I hope. It's going to be a fundamental break after this. That era will be over, because the Sinocentric globalization order of the last 20 years has to be overthrown. And if we work towards it with concert and with purpose, I think we'll get there.
Okay, thank you, Sreeramji. Next question by Sushimji. Sushimji, can you please come on to video?
Okay, I'm in my pajama kurta, so I'm holding off.
Okay, please go ahead with the question.
Okay, I think Dr. Sreeram has given an excellent rendition, a positive rendition after a long time, because when you read the media here, sitting in the United States, it's so much negative. My question to Dr. Sreeram is, since Covaxin is a purely 100% Indian drug, and so a new drug is also coming into market, which DRDO has helped out, is it still dependent on raw materials from outside sources, or couldn't we ramp up our own vaccines and forget about raw materials from USA or from somewhere else?
I think, I think components, our pharma sector has been quite successful historically. But, the way the supply chain is diversified across countries, right? That's the whole globalization. So Chinese raw materials, US, European, these were all critical for different kinds of drugs and vaccines that we've been making. So, yeah, I mean, look, from a public policy point of view, I think we should have placed a bigger bet on Covaxin because the efficacy rate is high.
Yes.
And the trials show that it's very good. In fact, if we are given an option between the AstraZeneca and Covaxin, people would opt for Covaxin. But it's just that we did not see the difference. And that's the thing that Trump did right. I mean, Trump did a lot of mistakes too. But one thing which he did right with this Operation Warp Speed that you had in the US, was that they financed a lot of the R&D and even took advance orders from the big pharma companies, right? So that spurred the quicker innovation. One error maybe we have made is we did not um, finance Bharat Biotech, for example, or biological. We had some, especially Hyderabad-based companies, were very good and innovative and had the scientific know-how. But the problem is the scale, right? I mean, they were supposed to make up to 70 million or more doses a month, but now they're hardly able to make 10 or so, 10, I think, something like that. And they're waiting for components. So there are areas where I think advanced financing pre-orders in bulk or assured, what do you call those, buyback options or something, where the government says, you manufacture and we assure you of sales. No, that's that sort of public-private coordination in November, December, January, when the vaccines were just coming around, probably could have been better. And it's just that I think people thought not just government. I mean, look at ordinary people, educated people like us. Me and my wife, you're saying we'll wait. What's the problem? In January and February, when the doses were available, I'm not yet 45, but when we became eligible, we were just saying, अरे भाई क्या है, देख लेंगे, maybe after a few months, अभी वैसे भी cases बढ़ रहे हैं, maybe there's a chance of getting infected going to a vaccination center. We'll just hold back and wait and see how this is. So a lot of people were not seeing the urgency of this until April. Now suddenly we woken up and saying what went wrong. You see, there are some people who say, okay, we had a vision, foresight. Even in January, we were saying we must invest in Covaxin and pump out the volume. And now the government is saying what 4,500 crore or something they are giving to these to ramp up production, and it will happen. As I said, June, July, by August, we are going to be in good shape and not struggling like this in the next 2 months or so, 2 to 3 months. But could it have been done earlier? Yes, but then there's so many priorities, right? I mean, who could have foreseen this? At least nobody could have foreseen this was going to be such a deadly mutation. So that's where you could argue that we went wrong, or you could argue that, like many other countries, we were just groping in the dark. And it's not only India that was groping in the dark.
Sreeramji, while you are on the same topic, while I was interacting with people in India, most of them were saying, like, they have not taken vaccines, and in the villages, people were not taking because they were afraid of side effects. So there were a lot of rumors apparently were going on. So why didn't government or somebody, come forward and educate the people and encourage them to take vaccines? Because I don't know how far it's true, but I heard a lot of vaccines even got wasted.
Well, Somanaji, the thing is, it's a big country and people have all kinds of, mindsets. There were some, I think, who were avoiding it due to this fear of side effects. But I would say the bulk of the people who didn't step out in January, February, March, when there was availability of plenty of stock, were those who simply did not see the need for it, and were saying, "Kya baat hai, why do we even need this? It looks like we have successfully controlled this." So I think the hesitancy was not so much anti-vaxxer type, sentiment like you hear in the US or in other countries. It's more like just, a sense that we don't even need it. We are fine, and there's not going to be a big health crisis anymore. Most people got into that mindset, complacency, you can call it. Yeah. So I think that was the real issue, not so much fear about side effects and all that. And of course, I mean, there are some who would claim that the whole thing has been fast forwarded, even the trials. This is unbelievable. How can a vaccine come around within just 12 months of the outbreak of a pandemic? It takes 2 or 3 years. This is not done properly. There may be side effects. But I don't think that was the main issue. It's just low level of demand in the initial months, thinking that it's redundant, superfluous, not required at all. हम तो भले चंगे हमारा कुछ होगा नहीं. Now when they're seeing the deaths suddenly soar, now they've woken up and saying, where is my vaccine, right? So I will say that, we are all responding to circumstances and reacting to circumstances. Most of us lack the, let's say, wisdom or the sagacity or the great foresight that may be required. But that's the case everywhere, right? In most countries, even the so-called, uh, developed, advanced, industrialized countries of the West failed at different stages. So it's human folly, I would say, if you go to psychology.
Okay, thank you. And next question is from Sampatji.
Sure. First of all, thank you, Sreeramji. It was a wonderful, very illuminating speech. I do appreciate that. I'm not going to ask vaccine questions because you already had enough time to answer them. Basic fundamental question bothers me for last couple of years is freedom of speech. Do we have freedom of speech in India? Because the way I understand, last week or so, there were posters in New Delhi against vaccination being distributed overseas. They were all arrested. I mean, can we not say that it was wrong policy to give away vaccination to other nations when our own people are dying? You mentioned 65 million vaccinations. Even you save 65 lives of Indians, I think there's a great gift. I don't think we need to diminish any individual life of a countryman in India. I mean, I don't want to argue on that, but I just want to know, I think, I'm very fond of Modi ji. I got Pravasi Bharatiya Samman Award. I'm not trying to diminish the importance of us and diaspora, but it really hurts my feelings when people get arrested because they spoke against prime minister or president or somebody. This is not the one incident. A year ago, there were some students in Kerala. They criticized Modi ji on WhatsApp, and he was arrested. I don't think that augurs well for a democracy like India, which we want to sustain and worship the democracy. Just on follow-up question, that will be my last question. Do you think it was a good idea to have elections in West Bengal in spite of such a serious COVID infections in the country? So, and also at the same token, Kumbh Mela, was it necessary or was it trying to please fundamental Hindus? So with those two questions, sorry if I hurt anybody's feelings, but those are coming from my heart. So I would appreciate if you can answer those questions, please.
Thank you, Dr. Shivangi. Well, again, just going back, just to reiterate the point, we did not export vaccines when people were dying in India. January to March, you look at the stats, please. The death rate was less than 500 people a day. Now you call it normalcy. The US, even now, you know it. Even now, the daily death rate, despite overcoming turning a curve and now improving, is still around 500 to 600 people a day in the US today, as we speak. So that was what we had. And for a country of 1.3 billion, 500, 600 people dying was seen as, there's so many other causes of death, much more worrisome than 500 to 600. So January to March, people were not dying, sir. And that's when we did the vaccine diplomacy. The moment it looked like, suddenly we have been hit, blindsided by this deadly mutant, double mutant, we immediately calibrated and halted the exports. As to freedom of speech, now, this has also become a big stick with which to beat India. People are saying democracy is declining, civil liberties are under threat. The Freedom House, there was a downgrade recently. The only problem with all these people who are saying this is there is no objective measure of this. I mean, there are incidents, you mentioned some, even at the state level. And by the way, when they say democracy decline, it's not only because of the actions of the central government. There are many states where you have the so-called, idea police who are going after any critics of even the chief ministers. Mamata Banerjee in West Bengal does that too. If somebody made a comment against her, or passed around some, cartoon lampooning her, those people have been arrested. I know this. So there are a lot of such incidents across the
That's
country.
wrong thing. I don't think we should encourage that. That's what I'm saying. Because just because
No,
Mamata Banerjee did a wrong thing doesn't mean whole India has to do it.
Yeah, so I really don't know, Dr. Shivangi, about this particular protest that you're talking about and people being arrested, but I'll give you an example. Farmers agitation, you all remember? It almost feels like another era. 6 months back, there was a massive farm agitation. How did the state react to it? Was it behaving in a totalitarian way, or was it giving total freedom to these protesters? In fact, many of them were engaging in violent acts. You saw it in front of your own eyes. You must have, in Delhi and Punjab and Haryana, where I am, it was almost like the mob had taken over the streets and blocking the highways. They were, hooligans. Was the state being harsh on them? No. Was the state restricting their freedom to protest? No. In fact, we all felt that the state had to be stronger and to control these unruly elements. We all felt that the state was being weak and not being abusive, which is the opposite viewpoint. Go back a little further. 1 year ago, you will remember the CAA agitation, Shaheen Bagh in Delhi. These people were allowed to express themselves unlimited, endlessly. There was no curb or restriction on their freedom. They were attacking the government day in and out. They were saying many things which are objectively false. In fact, the CAA was the right thing to do. It was a sign of India's leadership in the region. It was not a religious discrimination against one community. But the way it was, projected and magnified, both in the Western media, which had direct links with some of these activists here, they were totally free. In fact, if I'm not wrong, the Shaheen Bagh thing went on for more than 3 months. There were no attempts to sabotage them, to arrest them, or to shut them up. The state was saying, democracy abai, jisko jo karna hai karo. Right? So I would say one should not jump at, I don't know the specifics of this particular case or 1 or 2 incidents that we hear now and then. We have to really look at what actually happened. Were these people engaging in violent or criminal actions? I don't know. One has to really look into it. So if you look at the big protest movements, big anti-government agitations in India, they are going on. Nobody is suppressing them. Some way you may hear some exceptions here and there with occasional, acts of abuse of power here and there. But overall, I would still say India is a weak state with a strong society, which has got all these community-based networks and all that, family, ethnicity, caste, religion. These are more easy binding factors than allegiance to the state. So there is that the sense of citizenship is weak. So people have a lot of freedom, and in fact, excessive freedom, I feel sometimes when you look at some of these movements. No, so that is converse to the view that the state is clamping down or is becoming intolerant. No, so I don't know which version. If you look at the macro level thing, I don't see any democracy decline or any such thing. It's just that liberals are frustrated and angry. They are allied with the international media houses and ratings agencies, and they're trying to create this sense that freedom is in fact, the amount of criticism Narendra Modi has faced in the last 1.5 months, 8 weeks, is tremendous in news media and social media, in public sphere. There's nobody gagging those people from criticizing him or saying that he failed. So I don't understand how we can say that there is a, Orwellian kind of control being attempted by the state. The state is not that strong or not that capable. And in some cases, we want the state to be more capable. Kumbh Mela elections appropriate. Sir, these are explosive issues. Elections have to happen, right? I mean, when the term of an assembly expires, as constitutionally, it cannot last for even one more day in power, right? You cannot extend the tenure of an elected assembly more than 5 years as per the constitution. And by the way, I think last year also during the first wave, if I'm not wrong, the Bihar elections happened during the first wave. And Bihar is a very big populous state, as you know. So based on that experience, and there were multiple phases in Bihar elections. So based on that experience, they thought that they could do a similar thing because the terms of these assemblies were expiring. In hindsight, you can say it was a mistake. I don't know. Kumbh Mela, I don't know. I mean, from what I hear, it was restricted. It was not allowed to go its full length. And from what I hear, it did not cause a massive, it was not a super spreader event. It did not cause a massive spurt of infections in UP. And by the way, UP, you hear about bodies washing up in the Ganges and a lot of people dying. Yes, there may be such, but still UP, if you see the population, the size of UP, they have still been relatively better at controlling this virus than Maharashtra or Delhi. Just look at the staggering deaths that we have seen in Maharashtra and Delhi and Karnataka to also an extent. UP has not been so bad. So I don't know if the Kumbh Mela is the cause of this. I mean, in India, what has happened is there is one set of people, the polarization is not so much in the wider society, but in the commentariat. So what they do is, there is one set that said, Acha, Tablighi Jamaat is the cause of the first wave. You remember that last year, sir? And that's because there are some people who wanted to paint one community as the main problem. Now there are others who are saying Kumbh Mela is the main problem and that's why it has happened. But you see, objectively speaking, you look at the locus of the cases and the infection rate. It's not clear that either Tablighi or Kumbh Mela or the sadhus are the main cause of this. No, so I think this is become part of the discourse for everything now. In the commentariat, not in the wider society, but in the commentariat, it's become a Hindu-Muslim question. For everything, they are making it look like there is a religious dimension to all our problems. But I think that's not the case, sir. At least from the way I see it.
So, Sreeram ji and Subroto ji, how long can we go? We have like 4 or 5 questions more.
Shall we just quickly take them and I'll briefly respond?
Oh, okay. So I think one question was here, why is Prime Minister Modi ji and Amit Shah ji are silent on West Bengal issue? That's one question. And other questions, I think, they wanted to ask by themselves. So I have to give them one by one. If you can be brief with this, then we can, move on and be brief with every question.
Well, electoral defeat is not sweet. They lost an election. So I think they are just doing some stock taking and trying to from the ground what went wrong, why their strategy did not work. And I don't think it matters so much. I mean, in the larger scheme of things, there are some states where there are strong regional political leaders who cannot be easily displaced. So I don't think we should worry too much about whether they are.
Okay, so thank you. So next question, Sundaram ji.
First you should say all this, yeah.
Okay, so next, can you please unmute Siddhartha ji?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, please go ahead with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sreeram. I will come to a broader perspective of this politics because you are expert. My question is that like what we are discussing, it is very temporary phenomenon. I mean, time. But in long term, when we talk about in the politics, when we talk about the left centric and right centric, so for the global point of view, the Indian right is actually right. Yes, it is not the right. Understand? If we talk about the Bharatiya wisdom of the politics, so in international politics, why don't we where is the problem to represent ourselves as a righteous politics rather than right wing? This is one question. And the second question is that if you see the complex structure of the India, how do you see that this electoral politics is really representation of this real Indian voice, or you can say real Indian mandate?
बाप रे, आपने बड़े मतलब मूलभूत सवाल पूछे हैं. I'll try to briefly respond. Look, righteousness is very much there. We have done a lot of good in the world, and we are trying to project ourselves as a responsible power, trustworthy and responsible power. And we are trying to shape global norms. In fact, if there was no India, there would be no push for a multipolar world order. It would look like a very much like a bipolar system with China and a Chinese sphere of influence and a US sphere of influence. That's all. So we are trying to shape the global norms and the values in a direction that is different. We talk about, for example, on climate issues, which is one of the big global challenges, climate justice, climate finance. We are raising the issues even with the vaccines, the IPRs. We are trying to continue to champion the cause of the downtrodden worldwide. So that is our righteous foreign policy, and we continue to be looked up to by many people. Those who are saying that we have become beggars in the last 2 months do not understand how much the world appreciates and loves India. So I think we are being that's the way forward to be a responsible power. Electoral politics, can it capture everything? Well, obviously not, but turnout is high. Remember, in elections, almost 70%. So people have not lost faith in the system. Nobody is being forced to go and vote or induced to go and vote. Most people are going to vote because they still have some sense of the state is legitimate. It's not an illegitimate state. If you look at the political theory, the turnout in assembly, national elections, everywhere, it's very high in India. In spite of the virus, 70% or more are turning up and voting. So that shows that the polity is not totally corrupted or failed. There are many problems, deficiencies, and failures, no doubt, at different levels. Policy and bureaucracy. Our bureaucracy has been tremendously negative on many issues and obstructing change and all that. But I think, and there is a notion, a simplistic notion that blame the politicians for everything, or that all the politicians are criminals. You hear that, right? Many people talk like that, but they also go and vote. And a lot of people do turn out. So I think there is something to be said about electoral process that must be respected and must continue, irrespective of viruses or what. I mean, the US also, you had an election in November when you were in a very, very bad shape with the deaths piling up in the second or third wave in the US. So elections, I think, is a common denominator, right? We cannot completely throw it aside and construct an alter. Otherwise, then the Chinese model works, right? They say we have a meritocratic elite, Communist Party. We know everything that's good for 1.4 billion people, and we will just decide you trust us. That's the other model. So I think there may be other means of mobilizing society, cultural and social, which are not party based, and we should maybe emphasize those more. But we cannot get rid of the electoral framework. It's the basis for the legitimacy of the state and for the nation state of India.
Next question from Devji, Dr. Devji.
I am Devdhare, Deepti Devdhare.
Sorry, I'm unable to put my video on. Namaskar, everybody, and this was a wonderful presentation.
Is it?
Can you hear? This is Dev Ganguly. Is that who you wanted, Somnaji, or?
Yes, please go ahead, Devji. And then we will come to Deepti ji.
Yeah, I agree with most of what was said tonight. Of course, a couple of areas of contention is that many of us in the field of medicine, as well as international observers who follow India keenly, do not really trust many of the numbers provided regarding COVID by the government. And there are scientific models which very authentically dispute the numbers being provided by the government, and that is a different issue. The issue of vaccine was very well touched upon, and he did agree that we made a mistake in not pre-ordering. We did not order any vaccine till January of this year, and the first order was about 15 million vaccines which were pre-ordered, which would have covered about 1% of the population. So these are some of the issues. And the other thing is that Sampatji raised a very important issue. Are we allowed to speak? I would put that question in a different way. I would frame it. Are any of the cabinet ministers allowed to speak other than Amit Shah ji and Jaishankar ji? Are any of the cabinet ministers after the departure of Parikar ji and Jaitley and Sushma Swaraj? I don't think there is anybody of stature who can stand up and speak truth to power. That is the perception of India lovers, Modi lovers like me. I believe that he needs to change his team. He needs some strong people. He needs more intellectually inclined think tankers to support him. You know, most of his cabinet people have been there for 7 years. We need to see some fresh legs in this cabinet. That's all I have to say.
Well, sir, on the numbers issue, I will simply say that underreporting and undercounting has happened in every country. Not only in fact, I saw some Johns Hopkins data saying that even the US now, if it's around 600,000 or so is supposed to be the total death toll, the actual toll is about more than 1 million. And likewise, what is called excess deaths are being all now compiled around the world, even in Italy, in France, in Britain, everywhere, even where the statistical systems are seen to be more reliable or accurate, the models, there has been undercounting and underreporting. And the WHO is saying overall, pretty much in every country, it is about 1/3 of what is happening being reported. So you triple it, you triple the number, but you probably have to triple it in many countries, not just in India. So that again makes it, that's why I was saying we should put this in a relative or comparative perspective. Cabinet being a
We agree about that.
Yeah. Cabinet being the,
sorry, I didn't want to interrupt. Go ahead.
Please. So cabinet being a rubber stamp, I don't know. You know, there are strong leaders and then there are mild leaders. There are different styles. You may remember during Mrs. Gandhi's time, Indira Gandhi's time, they used to say she was the only man in her cabinet. So, and she was a very domineering figure. And some people say that Narendra Modi is like her in many ways. I don't know. I would not like to make such parallels. Some people say he secretly admires her because he always criticizes her father and her descendants, but never her. So I don't know about this, but one thing I can say is the kind of abuse of power and excessive, authoritarian tendencies that we saw under Indira Gandhi, I don't think Modi has shown this at all. She used to fire governments left, right, and center, state governments. You remember, Article 356 was like a weapon in her hand. And I don't think Modi has ever done any such thing, and he has never exceeded constitutional authorities. But alternative viewpoints, I don't know. I mean, people always say that he's very adamant and he doesn't listen to anybody, and what jo thaan liya wahi karte hain. To an extent, that has worked for India in the last 7 years. But wider council, yes, maybe wider council. But he says that he engages not with the intellectuals so much or with the elites, but with the general public, the consultation with the general public and the mass involvement and contact that he does, I think is also very unique. So whether the feedback loop is working fully or not, I don't know. I haven't studied the domestic policy making process that much in India. But change of style, change of faces, perhaps, yeah, crisis should be the basis for regeneration and for new thoughts and new people. So maybe we'll see some reshuffles and changes as we go towards the 2024, the general election cycle in the next months and definitely next year. I think you will see some changes. Whether it is simply like some people say more rubber stamps will come, or whether contrarian voices will be given space has to be seen.
Deepti ji?
Yes. So I'll be really quick. You made some very valid points regarding social influencers. So I wanted to know what is the remedy for that, because just being silent about issues is not going to help at all. And I think there has to be a method by which there is a systematic response by the government to these social influencers. You put things very well by saying that they try to make very raw comments. Expert opinion no longer has any space in today's world, and the raw opinions are the ones gets the greatest amount of followers, and it is inciting lot of sentiment. To give you a context, I know I am on many military forums, and I can see the secular fabric of the soldier getting torn apart. And what is happening is, I uh, I have seen that now on many of these military forums, you have Christian officers, posting certain things, and they are consistently same, like they are as if they are centrally generated. It is very shocking now. So the social influencing which you talked about is valid and all the concerns are valid, but what is the response for this? I think we need to have a government body which is giving the government's position on this. Like for instance, the Kumbh Mela, we all know what would have happened if the Kumbh Mela had been stopped. Okay, but the government did engage with the khadas and stopped them early, right? So the narrative has to be explained, and there has to be an engagement with these social media posts. And I think there has to be a body of people who are working on behalf of the government to make these responses. I wanted to know your opinion about it.
Thank you, Diptiji. I think I share it completely 100%. In fact, just 2 days ago, Prasar Bharati has floated the idea of Doordarshan International, a new channel that will put out India's viewpoint on both domestic and international issues, and be comparable to an Al Jazeera or a BBC or a France 24 or a Deutsche Welle. So our narrative has not been heard and is not been systematically projected. It's not just a clarification by an MEA spokesperson or somebody that doesn't get across, right? There's a lot of, in today's world, to counter the influencers or the negative naysayers, we need to have positive sayers out there in the public sphere. So a global 24-hour world news TV channel is something we have been advocating, which with a distinct Indian viewpoint. Doordarshan International, I mean, people are skeptical about Doordarshan because in the past it was seen as very bureaucratic and low in production value, not watchable.
And it
People
was
say,
a mouthpiece. It was a mouthpiece. See, you need to get credibility also. Like you beautifully said, that it should be expert opinion. It should be, supported by genuine data. It is important that in today's world we have transparency and credibility. Then it becomes easy to fight many battles. So,
yeah, and some propaganda is necessary. I mean, you look, when you are being subjected to a lot of brickbats around the world, you need to also project an alternative viewpoint. I mean, it's not only authoritarian countries like China or Qatar which are doing this. Even democracy, the Germans have, the French have, the Australians have their own TV network that's beaming in more than 50 countries. So this is something that's been long overdue, and online opinion also, there are ways to be able to counter them. I mean, what we call troll armies and such things. Frankly, at a level of tactics, how do you cut a diamond? You need another one, right? So there has to be also counter propaganda and also showing positive
that
stories of
effort,
India.
I know, sorry to interrupt, that effort I know is there. What is not there is a systematic response from the government. Like for instance,
I
if
agree
you
with you.
see the laws, the farm laws, they are not very accessible to the common farmer. Now it is important to have a portal which, for each tweet or each comment which is posted, there is a contextual response, not in one language, in all languages, both in audio and in text. I don't see that type of effort.
Yeah, I think PR and the public diplomacy, we have underinvested. Do you know we only have 4 people or four, including a joint secretary in the Ministry of External Affairs, in charge of public diplomacy division? The US has more than 500. China has more than 1,000, only doing public diplomacy and putting the message out in different forums. And the amount of money they have spent on CGTN, China Global Television Network. You go to any part of Africa, Latin America, They've got local bureaus in the local languages promoting so-called positive image of China worldwide. That, I mean, it doesn't have to be authoritarian. Even the democracies do it. So I think this has been missing. I mean, I've been proposing this for a long time to have a world news TV channel of our own. Finally, after now, the Prasar Bharati saying now we got consensus on this. What happens, in India is the bureaucratic turf wars. Now, should MEA run it, or should the Information Broadcasting Ministry run it? What kind of staffing should it have? Will the INB secretary be in charge of it, or will we bring in a new set of forces? You know how it is, right? It's all about too many people who want a pie of the share of the pie in the bureaucracy, especially the bureaucracy. So what they do is they block, they obstruct any change. So this is where, as I said before, extreme bureaucracy has hurt us a lot. The IAS babus always claim that they are the steel frame. Unki wajah se hi ye desh chal raha hai. It's not Modi. That's how they talk, right? But then the reality is they obstruct and block a lot of change also, the bureaucracy. Talent, for example, new faces. Earlier we had a question in policy making. Always I hear, अच्छा भाई lateral entry नहीं हो सकता इंडिया. This is not the US. यहाँ पे क्या है कि permanent bureaucracy जो है, IFS, IAS, IRS, यही इन्हीं का राज चलेगा. And चाहे जो भी आए, they are the permanent rulers. They will not allow any expertise or new thing. To an extent, Niti Ayog, Modi ji has done some reform. Or planning commission was terrible. Niti Ayog, there are a lot of, I see new economists and new faces coming in, but still not probably be able to change the overall. Abhi wo Amitabh Kant, the same old, senior bureaucrats are running the show. Some of them are very good, but many of them are not, and they simply block new ideas from becoming effective and influencing policy making. So I had a lot of hopes that Modi will break the bureaucratic stranglehold. But if you see, the country is so big and it's not happened to the extent that one had hoped. So there are not enough protections for or spaces for new voices to come in, because the bureaucracy is very protective of the turf. That's my experience. Whenever I've encountered, they're very jealous of outside experts. अच्छा भाई आपका PhD है, अच्छा ये तो हमारे सर पे बैठ जाएगा. You keep him aside, I don't have a PhD, but मेरा 25 साल का तजुर्बा है of being in bureaucracy or in as a civil servant. So I know better than these people. Ye log, these are armchair thinkers. Inko you keep them aside. So there a lot of that, narrow. In fact, PM had, all of you remember, first Independence Day speech. He said, what is the difference between, if I'm in private sector, कहते हैं कि मैं job कर रहा हूँ. If in public sector, you say मैं service कर रहा हूँ. But what is the meaning of service? He said, इसमें मुझे क्या मिलेगा, इसमें मेरा क्या है, what will I get? Otherwise, I'll not do a single thing. So a lot of, I would say, even our slowness with the response to on a vaccine issue or something that has happened last few months, a lot of this is due to bureaucratic holdups and many different levels at which bureaucrats are saying कि ये नहीं हो सकता, ये नहीं मुमकिन है, वो नहीं हो सकता, ये नहीं हो सकता. For everything they say no. First thing is नहीं ऐसा नहीं हो सकता है. Something new or innovative, no, ऐसा नहीं हो सकता. This is not how we do it. I'll tell you how we do it. So this has been the problem, and I share your frustrations on this.
Yeah, so Sreeram ji, a couple people have been waiting for long, so we'll take those two questions or comments, and then we'll end this session in the interest of your time. The topic is so engaging, so interesting, and we are all, would like to continue, but I think, your time is also precious. So the next comment or question would be from Rajesh ji.
Is this me, Sumanaji?
Yes.
So, Sreeramji, first of all, awesome speech. I just loved every word you had to say. And I must say that some of the questions that have been thrown at you were, in my opinion, unnecessary criticism. I think India is dealing with a very difficult situation. I have lived in this country for 45 years. And when virus hit America with all its resources, there were no masks. There were no beds in hospitals. There were no ventilators. And dead bodies were waiting for 2 weeks before cremation. One of my own friend died. And for 2 weeks, he was told, his family was told, We have stacked up the bodies lying somewhere in 500 dead bodies. But there was not a news coverage here. In India, by showing fires burning and always criticizing, I think media is doing a lot of disservice in India. So I thank you for your input. And I'm very proud of being an Indian. And I think Modi ji is doing an amazing job. I have nothing but praise for him. I think Indians living in India are failing to support a great leader. Thank you for your words and for you coming here today. Sumana ji, thank you.
Thank you, Rajesh ji. The next question would be from Pradeep ji, and then Adityan ji wanted to say something, and then we'll close the session.
Yeah, I enjoyed this talk very much. Thank you, Sreeram ji. My curiosity is about relations between India, Russia versus India, USA, and also Russia, China. I just would like an overview of it if you can.
Yeah, thank you, Pradeep. In the time constraints, I'll simply say that we need the Russians for some strategic reasons, and we need the US for other strategic reasons. So we will continue to improve the strategic partnership with both Russia and the US. And it's not a contradiction, because everybody understands in a multipolar world, there are no fixed camps which you have to belong to. So even if we have Quad and other things to counterbalance China with the US, we also need Russia for various things, including our defense industry. And even in a way, softly counterbalancing China, we need Russia. So I think we will not abandon the Russia relationship. We feel sad here to see Biden administration, the way they are going after Russia. I mean, on one hand, they're also being pragmatic, but the problem with this is the more you alienate Russia, the more you push it into Chinese corner. And the Sino-Russian axis becomes quite formidable. So the grand strategy, we go back to Henry Kissinger, 1970s. The idea was always that in the China, Russia, US triangle, the idea was to isolate one by aligning with the other. Right now, what is happening is the US is trying to isolate both China and Russia simultaneously. And that is like shooting oneself in the foot. And part of the problem is the Europeans, because they have the war in Ukraine and other problems with Putin. They are saying that the price of our alliance with the US, or restoring the alliance with the US, is that we all have to train our guns at Russia. So this is a big problem, because the more you try to isolate Russia, the more Putin has Putin is a very pragmatic guy. He's not ideologically opposed to the US. He can never compete with the US. Russia is far behind economically. So Russia is not really a competitor of the US. And we hope that the US will pragmatically coexist with Russia and give it some space, because otherwise the Chinese are going to benefit from this policy. Yeah, so that's about it.
Yeah, so Adityanji, your comment, please.
I have just a couple of comments regarding Dr. Shivangi's observation that, quote unquote, they should have postponed the elections. India has a federal structure. Election Commission is a constitutional body which does its own assessment about the timing of the elections, the modality of the elections, the phase of elections. And as Dr. Chaulia had said, that you cannot extend the term of the state assembly. There were 5 states that were supposed to go to polls. Election Commission made that determination, not the Prime Minister. Mark the distinction. Election Commission has to make that determination. If in determination of Election Commission, the situation on the ground was not conducive to holding the elections, the Election Commission has a duty to send its reports to the Ministry of Home Affairs that Election Commission is not able to hold the elections. In that scenario, there's a likelihood that Ministry of Home Affairs will recommend imposition of presidential rule. And since there's no parliament, an ordinance has to be placed. The ordinance has to be ratified in both houses of parliament, Lok Sabha as well as Rajya Sabha, within 6 months. Now, if that scenario were to happen, the whole world have gone on the rooftop that Modi is authoritarian, Modi is undemocratic, he blocked the elections. And finally, about doing public rallies during the elections, all the parties did that. And I can tell you, Election Commission proposed virtual campaign to all the political parties. And do you know, Dr. Shivangi, which two parties agreed for that? One was BJP, second was Janata Dal United. All other opposition parties refused to accept the suggestion of the Election Commission that let's do virtual campaigning. So it's a lot of hindsight, creating facts on the ground when facts are different. And I think blaming the Prime Minister for the constitutional setup of India, how the elections are constituted, I think it's very unfair. People should understand what is the federal structure, constitutional structure of India before attributing, to central government or to the Prime Minister. Thank you.
Rameshji, would you like to say something before we end?
Sumana ji, I think Megh ji also has a question.
I think Megh ji has a question.
His
hand has been up for a while.
For a long time, he has been waiting, I think.
Who has the question?
Megh ji. Hello, Megh ji, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. Namaste. I'll keep it brief. Thank you for the session. I am in India as well. I agree with a lot of what has been spoken, but there are a couple of observations which I felt need to be placed over here. Again, I met Modi ji twice, and I'm neither left nor right, etc., etc. I think the previous speaker made an excellent point about the process and why the blame cannot be placed on the Prime Minister. But at the same time, I think we have all seen visuals of large rallies which were not held just only by the Prime Minister, but from across all political parties, where all COVID regulations were broken. And that is unacceptable as an Indian citizen for me, irrespective of who is in power, which party, where the campaigning, etc. The virtual elections point was an excellent point, which was made earlier. But after all those hoops, I think there was a complete letdown in many ways on this particular aspect. And instead of being an echo chamber of sorts, I think where criticism is due, that must be targeted and fairly across all parties. This is not about BJP or Congress or any one particular party. I just wanted to place that view as somebody who's living in India and who saw those appalling. I live in Tamil Nadu, and I've seen the campaigns over here and people without masks. So it is pathetic, I thought, that particular part of it.
No, at last word, I am very fond of Modi ji. It was nothing personal. It is an observation sitting in the US to see, motherland suffering. I'm very fond of Modi ji. I was told you, I met him at least 10, 15, 20 times, and we have a personal relationship. It's, how you feel sorry what is happening in India and how many lives were lost in West Bengal. And, it makes you feel, sorry to hear about it. I know it's constitutionally we're required to have election. I'm not against it, but, could have postponed for a month or two until the COVID had such a catastrophic time. I think sometimes you have to use your power to make sure that such things, you could have saved, I would have, at least 100,000 lives would have been saved. Just, there is a way you can always find a constitution to postpone the election and have it. I'm not saying I'm against the election or against Modi ji or against anyone. I'm just an outside observer. It's my feeling. Nobody should feel hurt about it.
I'm sorry, I'll just make a quick distinction over here. I think conducting elections, as the previous speaker spoke, he was absolutely spot on. The process was very clear, and it is not the Prime Minister's decision to decide on that, whether you delay it, whether you schedule it later, etc. But there is a law enforcement mechanism that needs to exist, for which elections didn't happen only in India. Elections happened in other parts of the world as well in last year. And we did not see the kind of in certain parts of the world at least. We did not see the kind of behavioral issues from the people, as well as the law enforcement mechanisms not being strong enough. So I am not at all putting the Prime Minister under the dock, but yes, during the elections, maybe more announcements could have been made saying, please, we didn't see any of that. I think there was a certain sense of collective dropping of the ball by perhaps everybody. And I think it's unfair to pin the blame on any one individual, particularly the Prime Minister.
So I'll just, I know we are out of time, but having lived here, cumulative, see, the wave is not caused by 1 or 2 weeks of campaigns or Kumbh Mela or anything, I think. It's cumulative up, right, over time. I remember after October 2020, when we succeeded in bringing down the death rate to almost less than 500 a day, we all let our guards down. No, shadiyan ho rahe the, non-stop festivals, Diwali, Holi, everything. People, large-scale gatherings, shopping, vacations. People are moving around. It was just overall. It's not just the political class. I think it then added up and slowly reached a critical point where it became a wave by April. So 6 months before April, we were all, taking it lightly. Hardly mask wearing had gone out of fashion completely. In fact, November, December, whenever I was going around in Delhi and NCR, I used to be the only person wearing a mask. Not a single person around had any. They were all looking at me like a curiosity. Ye ajuba kahan se aa gaya? So, yeah, I mean, now what do we? Now I think we just have to stop this hemorrhaging, and that's all. I mean, looking back, a lot of regrets.
So before Subroto give concluding remarks, Ramesh.
I will. I'll have a brief question on a different track, and then we'll finish.
I think Ramesh ji has something to say.
May I mention something?
Go at the end.
I think in common sense, we will react the way we are reacting. But even in US Senate, right? How much control we have if you want to do something right? If you don't have 60 votes, you cannot do it. That's the way politics works. So I think let us not worry about that. Let us find the solution for the crisis what we have. Then we can discuss all these things down the road after a month or two. This is what I will say. And I think if you look at the data, what they have been doing in the field, because I look at the Ekal Vidyalaya in the villages and this thing, there is so much effort. And bureaucracy is not easy to tackle. It's not easy regardless of where you go. But that's a part of it is. And thank you very much. This was really good, Dr. Chaulia ji, and this is very, very thankful. Go ahead, conclusion.
Yes, Dr. Sreeram ji, thank you for a very positive note this evening. I have a very curious question of you, and it has nothing to do with what we have said. I mean, while we are struggling with this, it seems that the virus stops at the borders. But I do not quite understand how Bangladesh is doing only 5,000-6,000 tests, and they're not reporting cases, and people are running around. Has the issue of these point outbreaks in India, has it been investigated thoroughly? I mean, I'm very surprised at this isolated outbreak in India, and lots of people have lots of opinions on it. Are you aware of any understanding? Why is it that we are alone suffering?
One angle that's being explored is this a weaponized thing? And
yes, indeed. That's what I was hinting at.
There is a lot of scrutiny about what the Chinese did in late 2019. What exactly happened? But I think Nepal and Bangladesh have been affected, from what I hear, especially because the open borders and people moving this way and that. And
last week we had a surgeon from Dhaka on a conference call, and he says absolutely nothing in Bangladesh. They're doing 5,000-6,000 COVID tests. At their peak, they were doing about 20,000 to 30,000 last year, and they are business as usual. I cannot figure this out. It seems to have hit us like.
So the other thing is the scale also, right? I mean, we are much more populous. So the multiplier effect of a wave is much bigger in a more populous country than smaller neighboring countries. Because Bangladesh is big, it's 160 million. It's not very small.
But Pakistan is 200 million, 210 million. I mean,
yeah. Some of it is suppressed, I guess. We don't know the facts. And second, I think some cultural factors may also come into play because they are more conservative, and there's probably some kind of natural inbuilt social distancing in those societies. I don't know. I mean, it's difficult to understand the pattern. Most of us are still scratching our heads as to why the locust. Now, for example, why is it still raging so much in South America? Brazil, Chile, Ecuador, Argentina, they're in shambles. Totally, they're still struggling. But it's not raging so much in, let's say, the Middle East. What explains the fact? I mean, there's still so many unknowns. Only I think time and hindsight, with more data and statistics, only we can really explain these puzzles.
Thank you very much for this invigorating discussion. Your message of positivity, backed with your background and expertise, and a very engaging audience. And thanks everybody who stayed up late and commented. And all comments are not going to be in an echo chamber, and we should avoid that. I think it's very important for us as a country to have some kind of a discourse. And I thank those who have been very positive. I also thank those who have offered their versions of critiques, and I think all of those are taken in good spirit. But needless to say, thank you, Dr. Sreeram ji, Chaulia ji, and thank you, Vivek ji. Thank you, all my senior friends, all my contemporaries. Those whose names I haven't taken, please do forgive me. You're all close to our hearts. So once again, you have a very good Sunday. And we'll keep in touch with you. And if there is anything we can do as part of service, we are always delighted, glad, and want to participate.
Thank you. आप लोग का सहयोग, as I said at the beginning, बहुत मूल्यवान है. आप लोग जो कर रहे हैं ये अविस्मरणीय है. लोग याद रखेंगे. आप you please carry on supporting India, and we need you. You are part of this civilizational India, wherever you are reside. And as Prime Minister says, you are also our Deshwasi. So please accept our humble gratitude and thanks for everything that you're doing. And वो bounce back जो होगा, वो मैं आपको guarantee दे रहा हूँ, bounce back होगा, and you are going to be part. We are going to feel pride in our nation. You already have inbuilt pride, but we are going to again hold our chins high and our heads high, and we'll again lead the world. Thank you very much.
So Dr. Chaulia, I think next time we will have it in Hindi, because आपकी हिंदी इतनी शुद्ध है. We should have it in Hindi next time, probably.
We hope we see you again, Dr.
Thank you.
Sreeram ji.
Thank you, and namaste, Sreeram ji, and everyone.
Good day.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.